Jay Ireland is going to be giving a few remarks up front, and then we'll actually transition into a conversation with our very own Professor Catherine Duggan as well, which you may have seen earlier this day. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our closing keynote. So Jay Ireland is President and CEO of GE Africa. In this role, he has responsibility for GE's operations in sub-Saharan Africa, which includes more than 1,500 professionals. Previously, Jay was President and CEO of GE Asset Management, a leading global investment firm managing portfolios for a variety of clients, including corporate, public plan sponsors, foundations, endowments, and other investors worldwide, as well as those for GE's primary U.S. pension plan and other benefits program. Prior to GE Asset Management, Jay was president of NBC Universal Television Stations and network operations. Before joining the NBC in 1999, he had been CFO for GE Plastics. And after 3 years in the US Army, as a U.S. Army officer, Jay started his career with General Electric in 1980 in the financial management program in Lynchburg, Virginia. Clearly a very successful role within General Electric. Jay is a trustee of the Norman Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, a member of the board of the Dharman Runyon Cancer Research Foundation, and a trustee of St. Lawrence University, where he received his Bachelor of Arts degree in 1977. Please join me in welcoming our closing keynote, Jay Ireland.
Thank you. Thanks, Moses. Good afternoon. All you guys in the back, plenty of seats. Feel free to move up. I'm going to speak on a few things today, mostly about what we're doing in Africa. And the goal is to, number one, educate you, start a discussion, but also we're hiring. So hopefully we can get you interested. I think the first thing that you guys ought to think about is inviting all of us. I live in Nairobi, Kenya. I came in Thursday night to New York, and you should do this like later in the year where it's not so cold. Because for us in Africa, we're not used to this anymore. So I want to talk to you initially about Africa in general, some of the issues that we face, and then we'll move more into specifically GE. Now hopefully I can get this thing. There we go. All right, number one. You guys all know Africa's big. The continent is huge. You heard earlier speaker talk about what land masses can fit in this. And the biggest reason I show this is because people really don't understand what the impact is on people in doing business and traveling. So to go from Nairobi to Dakar, Senegal is about an 8.5-hour flight, not crossing a body of water. It's pretty hard to do that almost anywhere else. And so that really, and north-south, same deal. So it's really an aspect of moving around and from a standpoint of really understanding the impact, number of days it takes just to get around the continent and really to do business. I think one of the other things about perceptions, as you can see on this chart, is the Economist cover from a decade plus ago, where you said the hopeless continent. And then a couple years ago, you went to Africa Rising. Unfortunately, there's still some of the stuff that happens on the left, as we all know and we see almost every year. But more and more, it's mostly on the right. And that's what's so exciting about being in Africa today. I think I want to talk about risk and perceptions, because I think perceptions are the key, because to really solve all the issues that we see in Africa, it's going to take money, and that means investment. And investment's all about risk, return, and about that is perceptions. So this is what most people think about Africa. Safaris, if you come to Kenya, you go to Maasai Village, you see a rural area. Sometimes you may fly in and out of a city, but fundamentally, many people's focus on Africa is still around a very rural environment with not a lot of dynamism. However, for those of you who live there or deal with it, this is the reality. And one of the interesting things about this, on this picture on the left, which is traffic, is that I showed this at one area, and they thought I photoshopped it. And you probably all know that's probably Legos. And there's nothing worse than taking your CEO. My CEO, Jeff Immelt, visited about 3 weeks ago, and we were on the bridge from Victoria Island to the airport for 3 hours. So that was, you know, could have been a career-limiting move, but I'm too... But one of the things is when, you know, I kind of raised my hand to go to Africa 3 years ago, and I felt that they needed a young guy, so that was important. And number two is, at my tenure in GE and my time, there isn't much of a career to limit anymore. So, and then on airports, we've got on the right-hand side, either they're being built or they should be rebuilt. And typically, the airport I fly in and out of all the time is Nairobi. The bad news is we had a fire about a year ago, and the good news is we had a fire because now it works better. So really, this is an issue, and we're starting to see a lot more infrastructure put into the environment from that standpoint, especially aviation, which is going to be key. But these are the demographics and all the things you hear about Africa. The billion people, the GDP growth, 6 of the fastest growing economy, of the 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa. You know, you've got a large amount of population without electricity, a huge oil and gas spend, and a number of air traffic passengers. And then on the right is what's going to be happening in the next 8 years now. But the biggest thing is fundamentally is down on the bottom. $50 to $90 billion has to be spent per year over the next 10 years to really continue the infrastructure spend. So all of a sudden you don't have Africa rising, or instead of having an Africa spring. And that's going to be a key thing. But the good news is the average rate of return on most infrastructure investments that have occurred in the last decade has been very good. So let's talk a little bit about some of these things. Number one is obviously the natural resources. And the way to look at this is to really sit there and say, this is not just, this is the revenue production potential, number one. And number two, it's a power production potential. So you've got minerals, you've got all of the, as you can see, you know, 40% of the gold, 88% of the world's platinum, et cetera. All that's great. But there's some things that have to happen. Number one is not just extracting these and selling them, but can you extract them, add value, and then sell a better, higher level product? That's number one. On the gas side, the key thing here is there's a huge need for power, probably 100 gigawatts over the next 10 years. And there's plenty of fuel to provide that power. You've got hydro, you've got wind, you've got solar, you've got thermal, which is coal, as well as natural gas, and then also diesel. But the key thing is getting that gas from off the coast into the mainland, so then we can use that for gas to power. And that'll bring the cost of power, the cost of manufacturing, all the things down to a much more reasonable level. Because right now, to manufacture in Africa, most African countries, it's not that expensive from a labor rate point of view, but all the other inefficiencies add up and make it much more expensive than doing it in China or somewhere else, and that's power, logistics, et cetera. So the opportunity is huge. You've got, as I said before, abundant natural resources, which is there for all, you know, that really can be monetized. You've got great levels of foreign direct investment. The private sector is getting more and more involved. The difference just in the 3 years that I've been there, you can see continued private sector investment, especially in the financing area. And then, you know, the world sees a need and opportunity. So Power Africa, which is a big commitment made by President Obama last summer, is indicative of this, as well as what you see coming in from China, India, and European countries as well. But it is very challenging. It's challenging because to build a new infrastructure, you still need infrastructure that's there. So roads, logistics, et cetera, makes it difficult to put in facilities, and whether they be power or aviation, et cetera. There's a continued untested and limited expertise in project development. Project development is huge, and this is where you putting together a power plant, figuring out how to do it, what the permits are needed, where the fuel's going to come from, et cetera, et cetera. There's still not very sophisticated project developers in whole in Africa versus somewhere else in the world. So we're helping in that. And then financing is still working from a standpoint of developing. As I said earlier, you've got tremendous perception issues from the standpoint of what the risks are, and it's really the lack of capital markets which has to improve. And then finally, projects development and execution takes time. The average time to develop a power plant is somewhere between 5 and 7 years. Of that, 2 years is putting a shovel in the ground and building the plant. So you spend anywhere from 3 to 5 years on paperwork, administrative things, and that's really too much time. With speed is the issue as you see more and more needs for power. So what we do and what we've done is come at it in a little bit of a different way. And that is really, you know, what we love to do is just sell a product and then collect the money. But that's really not going to work, because what we need to do is co-develop the entire project. We got to do feasibility assessments and then do the development funding, the structuring, et cetera, all the stuff on the right. And we put people in place to do this, project development resources as well as sales and project finance resources, because this is the new way, this is the only way really to get these big projects and things off the ground and going well quickly, is to take some of the expertise that we've learned elsewhere and bring it to Africa. So this is a little bit of the needs and solutions. We all know the percent of population without power, the 30.5% electrification rate. To put it into perspective, there's 80 gigawatts of power in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. 40 of that, half of that is in South Africa for about 40 million people. The other half, 40 gigawatts, is for the other 700 million people. New York City has 200 gigawatts. Sub-Saharan Africa, 40. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity as you go forward on that. On the right is healthcare, another area that we're in. And the doctors per 10,000 population, you can see. This is a key thing. But one of the good things about Africa is you can push out innovation and capability out into areas and to practitioners that can really bring life-saving changes to the population. So these are all the things that people look at and say, oh, here's all the issues. But really, the spirit of innovation of Africa is really pretty keen. We got mobile money. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that in a minute. Telemedicine is continuing to grow. We're able to use handheld ultrasounds out in the rural areas, transmit images back through the ICT networks in countries. You've got a lot more focus on mobile. Basically, that's what you have, is mobile. The landlines are awful. And so everybody focuses on mobile, and there's a tremendous amount of innovation around that. Biogas, gasification, alternative fuels. We're working across the continent around this, because this is another way to solve the off-grid solution, the off-grid issues of getting power to off-grid areas. And then finally, pop-up clinics providing primary care and capability out in the rural areas for healthcare. So as we look at innovation, you know, we did a study a year ago across the world about innovation. And one of the issues that we talked about is, you know, what's the support structure, et cetera. So we did one in Nigeria and South Africa from a standpoint of what's that like in Africa. And some of the stuff we found is lack of infrastructure, obviously, that's one. But more is the lack of university focus on entrepreneurship. 7% of the schools and curriculum are dedicated to entrepreneurship in Africa. 28% offer entrepreneurship courses, and 10% only 10% offer some kind of innovation and technology courses. So this is something that can be beefed up to really provide a base. SME funding gap of what's needed is about $140 billion. There's lack of financing support around this and lack of expertise. So how can we accelerate this innovation? Because innovation is going to be key to solving a lot of these problems. You know, greater technical training, and we're doing a lot from that standpoint of inputting more and more capability into African universities through curriculum development, scholarships, professorship that we sponsor, et cetera, because we need this technical training. Innovation summits, also bringing people in together to really do a lot different things. Private sector needs to work with the universities, as I said before. We're doing that, partnering with some companies. And government and private sectors need to integrate innovative businesses into the value chain. And then really focus on SME development. any growth in in economies is going to come through SMEs. That's the bedrock of economic growth, and that's going to be key. So it's really trying to provide advanced solutions to meeting some of these local needs. Whoops. So one of the things that we've done is we partnered with the U.S. Africa Development Fund to do the Off-Grid Energy Challenge, Innovation Challenge. We awarded $600,000, $100,000 to 6 different projects, 3 in Nigeria and 3 in Kenya, around off-grid energy solutions, very small solutions. And these things right now are in the process of either being developed or coming to fruition. The one in the Afe Babalola University is one that's coming to fruition, and we're starting to see a lot of press around that and what the innovators were able to do with $100,000. So it's as you can see, it's a wide range of products around solar, around wind, around biodegradable materials, et cetera. So this is really some way we can foster some of the innovation. And then I want to talk a little bit about where I'm based, which is Kenya, which tends to be very focused on ICT innovation. I think M-Pesa is one of the most innovative things, and they still don't get enough credit for what's happened. Almost $20 billion last year of money transactions occurred in Kenya. 20 billion. That's within a country of 40 million, low income. That's how much money is transferring. When I moved there, they said, oh, Kenya's an unbanked population. In the traditional way of thinking about banking, it is. People don't have bank accounts. They don't go to the ATMs necessarily. They use their phones, and then they use the M-Pesa agents that are around the country. The revenues that are collected from the companies that service M-Pesa went from 4 million in 2008 to 250 million last year. That's pretty good growth. So to say that there's no innovation, and I always get struck by coming back to the US and reading about how people now can swipe their smartphones at a Starbucks and get a cup of coffee. And we're being able to transfer cash around from a standpoint of putting it from one pocket to the other without touching any bank institution or anything from that standpoint. It's really pretty tremendous. And 25 million people had a number of had 6 transactions across 6 platforms. There's 40 million people in Kenya. So it's pretty hard to imagine. This is well adopted. This is the way that the economy works. Some other great inventions that have occurred there. One is this brick. It's a small brick, but what it is it's a full-featured modem. It's a router. It's Wi-Fi. It's everything you needed to go into any rural area and it's a power with solar charge. So you have the ability basically to get all that anywhere you want in the country. The iHub is a collaborative area similar to what you see in Silicon Valley, where a bunch of these guys go together and think up and collaborate on software solutions. We have an indigenous motor company a car being built by an indigenous motor company that'll be launched in another couple months. And then Sanergy, which is basically toilets in slums that gather the waste and then use it to fuel power generation. Tremendous entrepreneurship by a number of individuals here. So let's talk a little bit about what GE is quickly before we get to the Q&A. We're roughly in about 25 sites. We've got about 1,800 employees. We've been in Africa since 1898, so 106 years now. We were fundamentally in South Africa, and then we were by business unit. 3 years ago, we put a One GE focus that I'm leading. You can see our orders growth, and we're higher now, up to 3.6. There's a big GE installed base in power, about 10 gigawatts, which is great. There's only 4 of it that operate, so that's a big deal from a service standpoint and maintenance, which is a big issue that's occurred historically. And you can see also in our aero derivative engines as well. Locomotives, almost 1,000 locomotives. Average age is 25 plus. So that's a real issue from a standpoint of logistical capability around the continent. And then finally, our aviation business. The CFM56 is the engine for the 737, and CF34 is for the Embraers, which are really the workhorses for aviation in Africa. And this is a little bit of our story. As you can see, in 2010, I got there right at the beginning of 2011. You know, we're almost, we will, by 2015, almost triple, quadruple the revenue. Our orders have already doubled. We're in a number of different countries. More importantly, they're broader than just the 3 countries that we were originally in from a standpoint of size. Our leadership is continuing to broaden out across all of our businesses, and our employees have doubled and will double them again in the next few years. And most importantly, our leadership has moved from almost all expats. We've grown, but we're about 50% local, 50% expats on leadership, and about 95% local on total employees. I think one of the key things to succeed in Africa, you've got to be local. And localization is a combination of having the capability locally, but also investing and making sure that your localization programs, building employment, building greater economic impact is key. So you do that through a number of different things. Every country has a localization issue. They want more employment. They want companies that invest. They want partnerships with companies, et cetera. And we do that through the left-hand side with joint venture partnerships. We're working on supplier development programs, training, leadership programs, and supply chain, which is absolutely critical. You can build a supply chain which multiplies the impact that you have in any country. And on the right are the actions that we've done. Pipeline development is what we've done. We've gone from about 10 people a year up to 200 people a year, hiring in our out of university, out of business school, bringing our pipeline, if you will, through all of our disciplines. We have one GE Nigeria facility in Calabar that we're building. We're doing an oil and gas subsea JV in Angola. We're working with suppliers, developing them not just from a standpoint of capability, but also financially. We're going to put a customer innovation center in South Africa, and then more local headquarters in regions as well. And then, of course, a big CSR focus. We will put in the next 5, in the last 2, in the next 3 years, $800 million of capital expenditures in Africa. This is off our balance sheet. We'll probably invest about $200 million of equity and other things from a standpoint of financing that we can do. So we're committed to Africa. We're going to be there for a long time, and we're building the base through all of these programs right now. And this is what we see as far as where Africa can go going forward. A tremendous growth of population. This is sub-Saharan Africa, over 1 billion people. Middle class is going to be 400 million. Passenger air, as a result of that, you're going to see a much different profile of what the economy is. Airlines are going to be huge. Power generation, you're going to see a doubling of that capability. The offshore gas, we need to get that out of the ground and used proactively, either in power or exporting that. And then finally, the healthcare spend. As you continue to see more and more non-communicable diseases become issues versus the communicable diseases. So all of that is a tremendous impact of economic growth, economic prosperity for Africa, and we're proud to be part of it, and we look forward to really working with everybody in doing that. So that's all I have prepared, so we want to do our Q&A.
Thank you very much. That was really terrific. It's interesting to hear both about what GE has done in Africa and about your personal story and how you got to Africa. So I wanted to start there.
Sure.
You mentioned that at one point you raised your hand and volunteered to go to Africa because they were looking for young talent, or you thought they needed young talent.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more both about your history at GE before you did that, and then about the choice to raise your hand to go to Africa.
Well, as you heard, I joined GE decades ago in 1980 and went through a training program and then a number of different businesses. The plastics business, the mobile radio business, NBC. So my legacy is that all the businesses I went through have been sold. So I can't go back. So, no, that's not why I went to Africa, though. And so I was doing the, basically running all the investments for GE. And And we put together this organization. Jeff and the board decided to put a real focus on developing markets, and part of that was putting in a global growth organization, trying to tie in Latin America, Africa, India, Southeast Asia, et cetera, into one GE focus, like I said, versus siloed businesses. So one of them was Africa. So Australia got taken by an Australian. So, I raised my hand. My wife I'd never been to Africa, so that was also something. But I said, you know, I'd be interested. I think the growth is there. It was the first time in GE that I didn't replace somebody. So, you know, it was a total entrepreneurial. I made a joke that when I was at NBC, I had about 5,000 people working for me. I went to asset management, that was about 500. And then I went to Africa and I had 5. So usually you go the other way as you grow up in business. But so we've grown it out. It was a great entrepreneurial challenge in a company that doesn't have many, because the size and the breadth and the history of GE. So that was fun. And I just thought we could really make a difference. And so my wife and I went over and chose Nairobi as a headquarters and location, built up what we have today. And like you saw in the chart, you know, we've doubled our employment. We're running at an running order rate of about $4 billion a year and growing. So we feel pretty good.
Yeah. And what did you find most surprising about going to Africa?
Well, I think with the first time I got off the plane, it was kind of like, what was I thinking? And then, you know, it was, I think the surprising thing was the innovation and what really exists. You know, I've been all over the world, and, you know, been in developing countries, was in China 25 years ago, and so, you know, I expected all that, but it was really the innovation and the lack of knowledge, I guess, by everybody else in the world around what was really happening in Africa. And so, you know, even now, the misperceptions around, you know, what it's like to live there, what it's like to work there, what the issues are, what you deal with. You know, some of them are right, but most of them are not. And there's a lot that reminds me of China 25 years ago. Oh, we can't do business there. What about the rule of law? What about this? What about that? You know, and then you see over time, these are the times you've got to go in, you got to make the investment, you got to do the right things, and then, you know, hopefully you grow from that.
Yeah, well, you talked a lot about this difference between what's really happening on the ground and the perceptions. Mm-hmm. And all of us have, I'm sure, experienced this phenomenon of seeing things on CNN, which
Sure.
are just a very, very narrow snapshot of what's going on in Africa, and never the most exciting stuff. How do you think that we can change that? How do you think that both a firm like GE and individuals can change that?
Well, I mean, you heard a little bit, the speaker earlier talk a little bit about that from the standpoint of what the media covers. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I would get questions from not just internally, but also externally. So, you know, we've had issues, you know, this was when Mali had their issue. And they go, geez, you know, is that really impacting your business and what you're doing? And I go, look, the Mexican, you know, there was a tremendous amount of issues, violence and everything around the Mexican border. We had to shut down a plant for a while around all the drugs, the drug cartels and all the violence. And I go, when all that was happening, did you question whether or not you should do business in Houston or Dallas? I mean, that's the dynamics that you got to think. There's 54 countries. They're all different. There's a tremendous amount of distance between them. And so, you know, what happens necessarily in Central Africa Republic isn't going to impact a lot of other places. And so you've got to think about it from that perspective, number one. Number two, I would say my job, I'd say my job is threefold. I advocate for Africa in GE to make sure that we get our share of resources and stuff. I advocate for GE in Africa, which is going out and selling what we have and doing all the stuff we talked about. And then I do a lot of time advocating for Africa, which is making sure people understand what it's like to do business there, what we can do to help them, to try to get more and more people interested. We need more and more industry there. It just can't be companies like us, Coca-Cola, you know, IBM. We need the next level down of small, medium enterprises, not just from the U.S. and Europe, but everywhere, and just building up that economic base.
And so you talked a lot about some of the challenges of doing business in Africa, particularly the distance and the traffic, which I'm sure a lot of people have experienced the traffic in Lagos. You didn't talk very much about things like political risk and about government involvement, but that's one of the things that we consistently know about Africa and doing business in Africa. How does GE manage those sorts of questions?
Well, I think when we look at countries, you look at obviously the size, the economic impact, and all that. But then it's a question of, can you do business there? And most of the stuff that we do is government, utilities, railroads, our airlines, even healthcare, in the oil and gas sector, the national oil companies. So it's a big deal for us to be able to work with government. And so, the main thing for us is that we see administrations change, but as they change, they honor what's been put in place. And that's been a key thing. And I think so if you see the countries that we're in, it's really wrapped around that. Some have been administrations that have been there forever, but you can do business. Obviously, a big thing that you look for around is corruption. And, we have a very strong integrity policy. We train our people. And if you never have a problem saying no. And so that's some of the things that we look at, and so we think we can do business, and if it feels like we can't, then we won't.
And what's your sense in terms of the trend of governments really keeping these promises, or at least making sure that the business context is good? It's getting better.
Getting better. I think what you see typically is an election. Well, it's no different than here. An election, the new person comes in and they want to do all this stuff before the next election. And it's very aggressive, and there it's mostly around, the big thing is power, and trying to get enough, as I said earlier, the length of time to develop a power project is longer than the length of time of an administration. So it's very hard to get that done over that quick a time, but to get that infrastructure built is a big deal. So I would say that, most governments are ambitious, but they're also struggle from a standpoint of financially, because they don't have the balance sheets and all yet. And many investors are looking to get sovereign risk guarantees, other kind of guarantees that chew up the balance sheet. So there's that balance that you're trying to get this foreign investment or outside investment come in and really provide the impetus and capital to grow.
So do you see the role of foreign investors or international investors as being different from domestic investors in that way?
Well, I think, two things that are occurring. One is the capital markets are increasing. So you've seen, Rwanda, Kenya, a number of different countries have done bond issues, mostly oversubscribed, pretty good rates. So that gives them the capital to be able to, and that's been a nascent reaction that's happened. And so we're starting to see that more and more as countries are going to do that. There's no real equity markets to speak of, size-wise, other than Johannesburg's. And so all of that capital formation that you normally see in other countries that provide the domestic financing isn't really available. The Nigerian banking sector got reoriented, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And, you've seen a lot of expansion there and a lot of investment that they've done, especially in the privatization of the Nigerian utilities. So we're starting to see it, but it's hard. So really it's going to be the outside capital. It's going to really make a difference. Yeah.
And so just to shift gears, you talked a bit about GE's feeling of responsibility, both in growing its own human capital development, but also in providing human capital sort of more generally by going through universities. How do we get more of that from the private sector in Africa?
Well, I think, number one, governments are not interested for a company to come in and sell something to them. They want you to develop. And so you've got to look at a holistic approach on how you approach going into a country. A combination of building out the supply chain, looking at the institutions, the learning institutions, if you will, the universities, technical schools, et cetera. Obviously doing what you can from a CSR perspective. All of that is tied into one thing. And if you're the good corporate citizen, for lack of a better term, is really That's what you want to do, because then you can spread out and talk more about what you're bringing to the economic development. And quite frankly, if you don't do that, you're not going to end up being able to sell stuff because the countries aren't going to grow. So companies need to put in their own footprint, hire locally, bring more people, train more people, the whole thing. We want to move away from a very prescriptive approach that governments do to localization, which is, you got to have so many of this, you got to do it this way, percentage of that, because that ends up being restrictive. And so if you can go in and really show, like I said earlier, a holistic approach, I think that's much more beneficial.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that firms and organizations within sectors are working together in order to sort of bring things to the government's attention or ask for things?
Somewhat. I would say, you're starting to see more and more companies. 3 years ago, we were like, Coca-Cola's done a great job of, being in Africa for a long period of time, well entrenched. But other than that, there haven't been, we were there for a long time, but I wouldn't say we were well known. People still ask me, are you General Motors? Or if, do you sell light bulbs or, stuff? And so those are the things which we do, by the way. So buy GE light bulbs, but not in Africa, we don't. But so I think, the aspect of the perception of your company is key. And so we're starting to see more multinationals come in. So, IBM's come in, invested in Kenya and around a technology center. Google's coming in, Microsoft. So we're starting to see a lot more. It was mostly European companies and a lot of Chinese, mostly civil engineering types. And so that's really been, so we're starting to see the change now. And most people were located in South Africa, and now they're starting to move and locate in Nigeria, Kenya, a couple of Ghana, so we're starting to see a move broader in the continent than just down in South Africa.
And so what responsibilities, if any, do you think that this burgeoning private sector and sort of burgeoning international group of firms has, not just to developing human capital, but also to ensuring that the business context continues to move in a positive direction?
Well, I think, the interesting thing about that is I'll speak from our perspective. Our goal is we hire locally. All the leadership programs I talked about, we've hired over 300 people in the last 2 years. They're all local, I'll call them kids. I know a lot of you guys anybody younger than me is a kid, so you must be happy. But anyway, and as a result, we've been able to do that. But what we take them, and then we will have them work in Kenya or Nigeria or Angola, but then we're going to move them around within Africa and then within the world within GE. And that's developing them, because what we want them to do is not always be at the affiliate in a small country of this big company, and they get to go see how the big company works or the headquarters of certain businesses, and then they understand that, and we grow a broad base. We've done this. I did this in Europe in the 80s. We did it in China. We've done it, and that's how you do it. It's a long period of time, but and then as those people grow through the organization, they become the leaders going forward. And so you do need a mix of that. And we've got a number of great people that we've developed. They're all differing levels, but we've got key leadership people. That leadership line I talked about, we've gotten a lot of local people and developed them, and so we're pretty confident about that.
Terrific. And so over the course of your career, you've had a very varied career, as you mentioned. What do you think you've learned that's been most useful in doing some of the work that you've been doing in Africa recently?
Yeah, my career is like an inch deep and a mile wide. Well, it's interesting. Every place you go, like I said, I was in our plastics business, and then I went into broadcasting, and then into asset management, and into Africa. And I think what you learn is, you don't learn, I'm not bringing television shows to Nollywood, or vice versa, back, or I'm not bringing plastic. What I bring is a business expertise And I think the biggest thing you learn is you learn to listen. The worst thing you could do is go anywhere, but go into Africa, which many businesses do, and they say, here's your solution. You've got to do it this way, which is the way that we all do it in the West. And it doesn't always work that way. And you've got to be flexible from the standpoint of putting together your commercial solutions. It's the stuff I talked about earlier. Our guys internally in GE sit there and go, why do you need project development people? Why do you need sales and project? It's like, because otherwise we're not going to get anything sold. We've got to bring a different level of expertise. We've got to make these things happen. And so you got to listen. You got to feel what the environment's like. You got to understand culturally how to do business, what the issues are. I think one of the important things for us was having the headquarters in Nairobi, because every other company comes out of South Africa and it's viewed, oh, you don't really want to live in Africa, and so or their view of that. And so I think that that's been important. So I think it's really listening, understanding the environment, crafting together with your team, what you think the potential solutions are, and then going out to the marketplace, and then if they're wrong, fix them quick.
Well, so what do you think some of the most serious types of mistakes that you see people making routinely in trying to do something?
Flying in and flying out.
Yeah, okay.
I was just, Thursday I was in London on the way back, and we did this all-day conference with a bunch of potential investors and developers, and and we've met with some of these people, and it's like, well, we're going to do project development, we're going to develop power projects in country whatever, and oh really, and where are you located? We're in Washington. And I'm going, well, how are you going to do that? Well, we're going to fly over, spend 3 weeks, fly back. That's a big mistake. And so many people try to do that. And I talked to some of my peers in some big companies, and they go, well, they're going to be located in Dubai, in London, in Paris. And you sit there and you say, why? Well, I can get to anywhere from there. I go, yeah, but it's a 9-hour flight. And I go, all right, so your sales group, if you were in London, would you have, if you had sales in New York, your sales office, your customers were in New York, would you locate your office in London? Well, no. I go, well, why is that any different for Africa? And it's all about, people, quite frankly, not wanting to move. And, that's not going to work in the long haul. Everybody used to serve Southeast Asia, living in Singapore and Hong Kong. And now they're in Shanghai, mostly, and then moving further inland, Tianjin, et cetera. And that's going to happen in Africa too. And I know that us being there with our management team, our executive team, on the ground in all these countries, because I've got some of my staff in each one of those countries, it makes a difference, because we're there every day, we know how to react, and we know what the issues are.
One of the sorts of questions that I bet a lot of the people in the audience have is not just not just whether to go back, but when to go back. So oftentimes students who are here, maybe doing an MBA in the States, or who are thinking about living part-time in the States and maybe gathering some experience before they go back, they're wrestling with a sort of when to go back to Africa, or at what stage of the career. What advice would you give them?
Any stage. I would say, you've got to, if you think the opportunity is there, that whatever the opportunity is, whether it's something entrepreneurial or working for a big company like ours or something in between, that it's something that you want to do. I think, everyone comes differently. Students that grew up in a country, came here to get educated, are much more easier to adapt going back. The harder ones are the ones that have lived, let's say, here in Europe for 15 years and have to go back, or not have to, but want to go back, and then realize, hey, it's not quite, it's not the easiest place to live. You have to adjust to day-to-day, issues of all the infrastructure things, and being without power, being without phone, and everyone forgets, you don't have power, you don't have internet. And so you're really in the dark. It's got nothing to do with being in the dark. It's like you can't use your computer. And I come home, and if the power's out and we have a generator, and that sometimes quits too. But if she doesn't on the internet that day, it's a bad night at home. And, you know, because that's the lifeline. And so you forget about, so anyway, it's really, I think really knowing and understanding what the impacts are going to be. But I think from the standpoint of coming back, here, the view that I see and why it's important to be in Africa now is that the growth, all the stuff that you talk about, the demographics, all that stuff, as more and more people, you see more and more elections that occur, more and more transitions of administrations, risk, the perception of risk becomes better, more financing follows, projects get better. All of a sudden, you're going to see a huge takeoff. That's not going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. That's going to continue to grow, but it's going to be in the next decade or two. And that's where, and you want to be on the ground floor of that. You don't want to be coming in. I mean, people that have done well in China were the people that went back 10 years ago, not the people that are going back now, because all of a sudden it's okay to go back. It's much easier. So you got to make the investment and put it in. So I would say, you know, any time between now and whenever, feel free, because there's a lot of opportunity. We were talking earlier, people come back and within weeks they're working somewhere, doing something very valuable, and again, growing their expertise.
Terrific. Well, before I open it up for questions, let me ask you one last question,
Sure.
which is not an Africa-specific question, but rather a career and a life question. So we have a lot of people here who are MBA students, who are in some cases undergraduates. What would you say to them about planning their career as somebody who's had a very interesting and a very varied career?
Try to plan it, but it's not going to help you much. I think, you know, when I was at NBC, I'd get a lot of questions around, you know, they all thought I worked my way up through the broadcasting business, and I said no. And then within GE, they go, well, how did you get from here to there? I said, here's the way to think about it. When I started in GE, the company that I worked for at the time, NBC, wasn't part of GE. It was part of RCA. And I said, the company that I started with in GE is no longer part of GE. So I said, you know, if I was sitting in Lynchburg, Virginia, in 1980 as a brand new program person, you know, to sit there and say I was going to be doing this at NBC, there was no way, because it wasn't even part of the company. So, and you know, I joined the financial management program, and there was steps of working your way up, but that's gone now. And you know, people switch companies. Even within our company, I mean, the good thing about a company like GE is you can work in a bunch of different industries and not leave the company. But even still, you can't plan anything, because just think of, you know, working in the broadcasting industry. I joined there in late 1999. The internet was barely alive at that point in time. Nobody transmitted. You couldn't physically transmit television shows and all that on the internet. Nobody even thought about it. And then all of a sudden, wham, 5 years later, you know, we got disintermediate, the music industry. So how do you sit there and then all of a sudden the digital person is the most important person rather than the guy who reads the news? So in that industry is one. In the investing industry, you know, all of a sudden it used to be around the analysts that sit there and grind through stocks. Then all of a sudden, you know, the high impact trading happens. So the majority of the trading that occurs on the stock, 85% of the stock exchange trading occurs at the first 20 minutes and the last 20 minutes. And then it's like dead in the middle of the day. And so all that's changed. And people aren't buying on fundamentals anymore. It's quick trades, quick trades. So that whole industry changed. So to sit there and say you can map it out, all I would say is take whatever opportunities out there, make sure you think about it, figure out what you want to do, and then go forward. If it's wrong, correct it. Don't sit there in a job you don't like forever. Be miserable for not just you, but everybody around you. And just, you know, just keep looking at what the opportunities are, because there's the way things are growing is, you know, I grew up in Schenectady, New York, upstate New York, and now I got to come back and get the cold by visiting you guys. But you know, who would have ever thought I would have been in Nairobi, Kenya? I mean, it just never occurs to you. So you just got to be flexible.
Yeah. Terrific. Well, so I think we'll open it up to questions. If we have a microphone down here and a microphone down here, if you'd like to come down. And as usual, we have 3 ground rules for questions. One of them is, please make sure it's a question. The second is, please make sure it's one question. And the third is, please don't make any speeches. I will cut you off. I believe in democracy, but I'm quite the autocrat here. So, please.
I'll try and follow those rules. So my name is Randy Ojukwu. Mr. Ireland, thank you so much for being here today. You know, you highlighted a lot of issues in terms of transportation, communication, infrastructure, healthcare, but I would argue that you still presented a very optimistic view of Africa. I would like to know what keeps you up at night. What are you actually worried about? That, you know, if A doesn't happen or if B doesn't happen, I actually see, you know, a very difficult time for GE in the future.
You know, quite frankly, I don't worry much about, you know, the biggest issue is going to be people, plain and simple. If we don't get a growing group of educated, trained, technically oriented people across, you know, whether it's people that work in the oil and gas industry or whatever, that's going to be the thing that stops it. So, quite frankly, I don't have problems sleeping. And you know, I just think we just got to keep investing. What I worry about is that we're not investing fast enough. And fortunately, my boss is the same way, Jeff Immelt, and it's just continuing to push the organization, because our company is no different than any other company. We are still focused, you know, pretty much on the West, and we're the developed world, and going into developing areas are hard. And being, you know, and changing the dynamic. And that to me is what, you know, if we're not going to get there fast enough. So we're going to, you know, we've got to just keep plowing ahead. And so I would say, you know, those are the big ones that I see, is just being able to recruit enough people in times.
Yes?
Good afternoon. I'm a structures engineer for Pratt & Whitney, one of your competitors. What unique challenges do you face with the aviation sector? You know, investing, it's a capital-intensive industry. It has unique challenges, overhaul facilities, very high technical expertise. What unique challenges do you face? Is your strategy in Africa just to manage the aviation, or do you see potential for growth?
Well, the aviation industry in Africa, I think, is on a. I think it's one of these that has the potential to be huge, but also can be the potential to get their butts kicked, all right? And it's a combination of a bunch of things. You got 3 airlines right now in sub-Saharan Africa that are Africa, you know, pan-African. Ethiopian Airlines, Kenya Airways, and South Africa Airways. You have nothing of the sort in West Africa. You have too many, and then you have Emirates, Etihad, Qatar Airways, all trying to make inroads and be the way that everywhere outside the world gets into Africa. So that's a huge competitive issue for them. Now, it's not just the airlines. You know, they can do a lot. I mean, Ethiopian and Kenyan are well run. South Africa is having some issues from a standpoint of, you know, the profitability of the airline on their long haul routes and things. But fundamentally, you need the aviation, the civil aviation authorities to be cooperative. You need good airports. You know, if you want to be a hub, you don't want to end up sitting in an airport that's awful for 3 hours. And so people, and that's what, if you think about what Dubai's doing with Emirates, that's a key thing. So I think it's a combination of everything. Most airlines fly during the day. There's only one flight per city group, city pair. There's things like that. All that has to increase. They've got to continue to work on the aviation safety and all that. So I think that's one. And I think there has to be more of a regional approach. Every country is not going to be able to afford an airline. It just is impossible for some of the smaller countries. And so they have to look at a regional approach and make it where they can, you know, they can band together and really make a difference. And again, that's going to be governments cooperating and aviation agencies cooperating as well. But rebuilding the airports, you know, South Africa did it. It's all tied to the World Cup, all brand new airports, which has been great. But we need to see that elsewhere. And then I think the other one is low cost. You know, it's impossible to drive. Somebody, I think one of the speakers before was talking about inter-Africa trade. You know, inter-Africa trade is less than 10%. You look at EU is like 80% within the EU. So you need to, and that's obviously the both ends of the hockey stick, if you will, but you've really got to build that up. And it's impossible to do it with the roads, no rail, all that within Africa. So aviation's one way. And so that has to continue to grow. So low cost is one. You know, if you're in Kenya, you pay over $100 of taxes. So to have a, you know, that's a lot of money. And then that's let alone whatever the fare is going to be on top of that. So all of a sudden the low cost isn't that low cost. And so that all has to get fixed. So I think the aviation sector is poised. You've got, like I said, those three that are working pretty well, and they're going to continue to grow. But we need to see a broader strengthening across all the sector.
Okay. Is there a question here?
Hi, my name's Avery Thomas Moore, and I had a question about your local content and kind of what are you trying to procure, and can you be more specific about how you're going about developing those local suppliers and providing them finance and space?
Well, the one we're doing the most work we have an assembly facility in South Africa for our locomotive business, where we assemble locomotives. And what we get there are like the bogies, which are the wheel sets, the frames, a lot of the some of the electronics and things like that. In Calabar, Nigeria, we're in the process of putting in this facility to do subsea tree assemblies, which are down below on the ocean floor that pull the oil up, and as well as turbo machinery and some of our power generation equipment. And we're looking at, you know, machining, servicing. We have a combination of Nigerian suppliers as well as our worldwide suppliers that are investing in Nigeria and local affiliates. So it's mostly wrapped around the technical stuff that we do. We're also looking at service partners, distribution partners in healthcare, in our distributed power business that can service, you know, the machines and service our X-rays and MRs and things like that. So it's across all of the businesses that we have.
Perfect. Thank you. One more question, please.
My question is mainly on the entrepreneurship work that GE is doing in supporting the ecosystem. Is the approach that GE is taking mainly one of helping Africa develop so that the size of the pie increases, the size of the market that GE can work in increases? Or is it also a little bit in line with Schumpeter's later views on entrepreneurship, where entrepreneurs are mainly an outsourced R&D for big corporations, so that if you see a promising technology, instead of having that technology grow into a billion-dollar business, you'd rather buy it out early, so it's kind of a cheaper way for you to innovate yourself as a GE, because you have to be sustainable as well in the long term.
I wish we were that smart. But quite frankly, it's a little bit of all of that. And I think, you know, the prior days where we would, you know, we spend I think it's about $6 billion a year on research and development. And so it's a big spend for us. But, you know, at the same point in time, we can't think of everything. And the collaborative approach is a real change in how we think about R&D and some of the things. So one of the things we did last year is we crowdsourced a design for an airfoil, which is part of our aircraft engine business. You know, a little part, metal, actually not metal, but titanium or something. And the winner of the crowdsource was some person from Malaysia who wasn't an engineer but had figured out what to do with 3D printing to make that happen. So, and at a much lower cost, all the stuff you just said. So we've got to kind of do both. And so the aspect of, you know, what we're going to do in Africa specifically is, you know, we're going to invest in trying to develop SMEs and trying to do some of the innovation I talked about that we see in Kenya. Put together collaborative places that we can bring in 3D printing, some new manufacturing techniques, all this stuff. There's no reason that you can't leapfrog, if you will, for, you know, lack of a better term, is in the manufacturing sector as well. There's no reason that, you know, Africa's got to go back to 20 years ago and start metal bending everything. Why not just take the advances that are out there today, utilize that, utilize all of the ICT infrastructure, and start being able to do it collaboratively. So there's a whole different way of doing a lot of things. So, you know, we're trying to do it from a standpoint of developing our own, obviously proprietary capability. You don't want your competitors to get everything either, but at the same point in time, it's a combination of putting together solutions. And I think that's the critical piece. And so as you look at, you know, R&D and what we do, the more that we can have people thinking about how to solve problems, the better off we're going to be. And if we can collaborate with them and use innovation and their ideas in doing it, and maybe what we can do is take that to the next step. All right, so we did a couple things in our healthcare business. We went to Kenya. We got about 10 or 15 doctors together, and we asked them for, what do you need for an anesthesia monitoring machine? And they gave us all the specs, you know, because typically what companies do is they take what you make in the United States and bring it to Africa, and guess what? All of those monitoring machines require a plug, and there's not always power. And so that's one aspect. So we designed this thing, made it, and now we have that, so using them from that perspective. We also have baby warmers that are like blankets, but instead of having, you know, for small baby, prematures or whatever, you don't necessarily have the technology to have, you know, the incubators that you see here. So we have these baby warmers, which was developed by a person in India, and we just brought it to market. So we're able to, you know, utilize that and utilize some of our strengths. It's not always about the development or the research. It's also about distribution, market access, things like that. So, and then if we can package all that, that even gets better. So that's really a big focus going forward.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. I think we've run out of time. I hope all of you will join me in thanking Mr. Ireland. It's been terrific. Thank you very much.